Well, good afternoon, everyone. I have approximately 1 minute after 1 on the East Coast, so we'll go ahead and get started. Folks can still continue to join. And thank you for joining, getting started with NIST 800-171 compliance for CMMC, DFARS, and FSA. This webinar today is brought to you by EDUCAUSE and Prevail. And again, we thank you very much for joining. Next slide, please. So joining me today is Harry Hoffman, Associate Vice President and CISO at Northeastern University. Along with Harry, we have Sanjeev Verma. Next slide. Sanjeev Verma is the co-founder and chairman at Prevail. And then lastly, you've got myself, Brian Kelly, Director of the Cybersecurity Program at EDUCAUSE. Next slide. So our agenda for today, we'll talk about the problem, the 800-171 compliance problem, how to prepare and get started with 800-171 compliance. And Harry will cover that. And Sanjeev will talk about technology solutions for protecting CUI or CUI. I prefer CUI. We'll have Q&A and then a breakout session. We do have Q&A functionality within the Zoom webinar during the session, so feel free to ask your questions through Q&A as we go through. And at the end, we'll have a breakout session where we can get into more detail about the challenges, the problems, and the solutions. And we encourage you all to stay and join us for an interactive session at the end. So let's talk a little bit about the problem. So who remembers 2015? It's probably a little better than 2020. At any rate, NIST released the 800-171 R1 version of Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information, CUI, in non-federal information systems and organizations. And it defines the security requirements or controls required to protect CUI that's shared by the federal government with non-federal information systems and organizations. The aim of 800-171 is or was to standardize how the federal government handles unclassified information that requires protection. And it's not going away. It's 5-6 years on. And for the last year or so, we've all sort of been thinking about 800-171 in the context of being foundational in CMMC, really is how it applies to our institutions from a context of CMMC. But in late December 2020, our friends at the Federal Student Aid announced their campus cybersecurity program through a notice to the community entitled Protecting Student Information, Compliance with CUI and GLBA, to inform institutions of higher education that their third-party servicers about upcoming activities to ensure compliance with 800-171. The EDUCAUSE, here at EDUCAUSE, the cybersecurity program, we're encouraging, dare I say, urging our members to get started, to not wait for further guidance from the Federal Student Aid or the Department of Education, but sort of get started on this journey to compliance around 800-171. And if you've heard me speak before, you've likely heard me say that EDUCAUSE and the cybersecurity program are here to help you learn, plan, do, and share. And in today's context, we're talking about compliance. And with that, Harry Hoffman's here today to share what Northeastern is doing. And Sanjeev will also share some solutions that you all can take and start that journey to compliance. So with that, I will turn the session over to Harry, and I'll go ahead and drop some links and links and references rather, in chat while Harry is presenting. So Harry, over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. Thinking about how Northeastern has approached our CMMC program, we've broken it down into 4 key phases. And those phases essentially allow us to understand where we are today, start some governance around this. I think, most of us in higher ed understand the need for governance, but part of that is really just pulling in the stakeholders who are going to be impacted by all of the changes that come with both CMMC and CUI in general. One of the first things that you'll need to do as you start to think about these compliance regimes is really get a good handle on your inventory. And that's something that's we've been talking about in higher ed for a long time, and still struggle to do correctly. CUI programs require us to have that in place, so it'll be pretty important for everyone to have a configuration management database or something similar in which you have a good inventory of your equipment, systems, and data. And CUI often means data, but it can also mean equipment as well. So it's important to remember that, whether that's cameras or drones or other things of that nature. Starting with the NIST 800-171 framework and creating a crosswalk against your own security program will give you a good idea of both the maturity of your program and where you stand as compared to 171. And that'll allow you to assess your security posture. So all of that happens really in what I would consider to be phase one. With that information, we walk into the second phase, which is really starting to perform a gap analysis and understanding what the security program needs to either add or change or update in order to come into compliance. And a lot of that around CMMC is really creating policies, standards, and procedures, because that's what you're going to be audited against. And then having a specific system security plan for each CUI area. I don't know many universities right now that will attempt to certify as a whole university, right? Most of the folks that I've talked to look to certify each of the different CUI areas so that if issues arise in one, it doesn't affect the certification of the others. And so that's something important to start to think about. In phase three, after you've got that together, really communications, awareness, and training is going to be a huge component. Any change that affects an entire organization takes a lot of time and effort to bring people up to speed with it. Just even to understand what CMMC or what CUI programs are, what the impact of those programs are to faculty and staff, sometimes students, to bring out required training programs, especially for the CMMC. And there are some online training programs that you can take advantage of. And then a continued awareness as contracts are negotiated, as researchers come into the organization. And then starting to really prioritize some of the gap remediation that was discovered during the gap analysis, and beginning to implement additional standards. We've been at this for about a year. We expect to be done sometime in the June timeframe. So that's just giving you an idea of what phases 1 through 3, how long they can take an organization. And then in phase 4, it's a continuous security assessment against at least your CUI environments. Brian made mention of various federal agencies coming in lately. So the most recent was the Department of Education. I suspect that more and more of the federal agencies are going to start to have CUI requirements for the data that they share. And so as I'm thinking about rolling this plan out to Northeastern, I'm thinking about using 800-171 as a baseline across the entire university. And then reevaluating the system security plan as the environment grows, right? Either it grows because additional agencies come in and classify their data as CUI, or it grows as a result of growth of the university. But either way, it will now become just a regular cycle with which you have to adapt to.
I'm just here. I was just looking at the chat and just making sure there was a couple statements in there. One on 800-153 versus 171, and then we'll let Sanjeev go. But I think we'll maybe hold questions till the end. We hadn't really worked through the logistics of, and I'm answering some of the other ones in chat as well. So
Sounds good.
So thanks very much, Harry, for the wonderful introduction. And so the question that I am asked to address is technology solutions for protecting controlled unclassified information. I want to step back because this is a compliance focused, gathering to ensure through the process of repetition that the fundamentals are understood. The NIST 800-171 that Brian and Harry alluded to has 110 controls, and the latest methodologies for self-assessment that come from the Department of Defense allow you to self-score yourself. And the scoring guidelines essentially result in a score ranging from -203 to +110. So if you get everything perfect, you get a 110, which means you're adhering to all 110 controls. But the scoring methodology has a negative component associated with it. And so it's not unusual to find companies and organizations and labs that may be in very sophisticated universities to be at the starting point at a negative, 200 negative scoring range. So how does NIST 800-171 differ from CMMC? And again, I'm going to focus on level 3, which is the level in CMMC, which is dealing with controlled and classified information storage and sharing. CMMC level 3 is 130 controls, which is including all 110 NIST 800-171 requirements and 20 additional requirements that warrant, significant additional protection associated with information for Department of Defense, vendors, and universities certainly are one of them. Another big difference between NIST 800-171 and CMMC is that, as Harry had alluded to, while in NIST 800-171 purely, if you are not meeting a perfect score of 110, you are allowed to come up with a POAM, a program of actions and milestones to remedy the deficiencies. And you hope that the agencies that are interested in certifying you accept that program. But in CMMC, at level 3, you must achieve compliance to all 130 controls. There is no mechanism for a POAM to address shortcomings. So it demands a level of perfection, and there are consequences to not achieving the perfection. The consequences, as currently specified in the CMMC program, are that if you are under a program that is asking for CMMC, if that's what's in your contract, and you do not meet CMMC level 3 and are holding CUI, then you are ineligible to participate in that program. And so, again, for the sake of further clarity, if you are a university, you're part of a defense contract, that contract is demanding CMMC, and you are not adhering to all 130 controls, you are ineligible for that. Another aspect that's different with CMMC level 3 is that the assessment, while the audit preparation can be done, as Harry had alluded to, internally, the assessment will be done by external auditors, and those auditors will essentially certify you as CMMC level 3 compliant with no POAM or not. So I just wanted to kind of set the threshold of understanding. So in this talk, for the sake of simplicity, I will speak to CMMC compliance, generally speaking, because that way I'm not saying you can do this for CMMC and that for, NIST 800. And again, when we speak to CMMC, we understand that NIST 800-171 is taken care of. So there are, several elements that I would emphasize are important to an organization that is embarking on either a 800-171 program, for example, to comply with student financial aid requirements from DOE, or the DoD CMMC program. And those 4 elements are, from experience, we have determined. Number 1, a comprehensive and thorough system security plan. So Harry's various steps of internal looking at things, etc., ultimately surely culminated in the creation of a system security plan. And these, just to give you an idea, for an organization that is achieving, say, close to perfect scores on NIST 800-171, these system security plans are about 225 pages that include each control, how you're satisfying them, what the artifacts that demonstrate your compliance with them, what the policies and procedures are. The second, and perhaps the most important element in terms of the differences and technology choices that you will be making, is in the area of the selection of a secure platform to comply with 800-171 and CMMC. So you'll ask the fundamental question, well, what are these platforms all about? You may have heard the word Microsoft GCC High or GCC or Prevail. So let me set that into context of what these security platforms are. So the very first is that most university organizations, most defense contractors and others are by default on commercial Office 365 or some form of an Exchange platform or a G Suite platform. And it is important to recognize that those three platforms are fundamentally non-compliant with NIST 800-171 and CMMC. Since these programs are all about protection for controlled and classified information, you now need a new platform that is being used to store your CEUI securely and to share that securely and to communicate that securely. And so you store and share those with usually using file sharing systems of some sorts. Often people are using Box or Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever, again recognizing that the basic systems are non-compliant. And then you're communicating using electronic mail generally. And again, the fundamental thing to recognize is that Office 365 and G Suite basics are non-compliant. So when organizations embark on these programs, they have to go and upgrade their fundamental technology platforms. And the choices that exist in the industry largely center around, if you are on Microsoft systems, Microsoft will recommend their GCC High solution, which will be again Office 365 and others, but all of the data being stored on their government cloud computing high environment. And GCC is their, just a government cloud computing environment. If you're dealing with ITAR, you've got to go on GCC High. If you are just plain CUI, you can go with GCC. But these systems require you to do a rip and a replace. You got to rip your existing system and replace, and understandably, that's a thorough and detailed process. Part of what Harry's team, I'm sure, did over the past year and a half. The second option for you is that if you are not on a cloud-based system and have your on-premise Exchange servers and file sharing platforms, then you got to do a very thorough revamp of those systems. And if you plan to be on them, to now comply with the controls mandated by CMMC and NIST 800-171. The third option is from Prevail. We're arguably a much smaller company, but it is a system that takes the position that you hold on to your G Suite or O365 or Exchange platforms and overlay it with Prevail, which is an encrypted email and file sharing system. So many of you probably are familiar with the way government handles classified information. If you work in the government, in the DoD, etc., you've got the basic email and file platforms, but then you've got things like SIPRnet and so forth on which classified information goes. So Prevail is exactly like that. It's a really simple platform that you can very rapidly deploy. And as I will show you, for those that are interested in seeing it in the breakout session, it basically has an email component that's fully integrated into your Outlook or Gmail. You keep your same email address, but your CUI goes encrypted on the Prevail system, and the file sharing system is like a Dropbox or a Box like equivalent from Prevail, except it's all encrypted, compliant with NIST 800-171 and CMMC mandates. And when you use that, you store your CUI on those. And again, from a user's perspective, it's just a folder on your computer. You just store it, share it through right clicks, etc. Again, I'm going to demonstrate for those that care about it. So the second point, again, to reiterate, is very important choice is what platform will you be using to store and share your controlled and classified information for electronic mail and files. And yes, I want to be not remiss in addressing Harry's point. In addition, certainly you may have other appliances, drones, etc., that need to be taken care of. But at a bare minimum, 70–80% of your compliance will deal with electronic mail and files. The third elements of a successful program are, expertise in compliance and security. So some organizations probably have that, but increasingly several will rely on a knowledgeable third-party consultant who has expertise in 800-171 and CMMC compliance. And we recommend, again, a CMMC AB certified third-party consultant can be very helpful. And again, echoing what Harry said, start early. Their program took a year or so. These are not easy exercises under any circumstances. And ultimately, the M in the CMMC is measuring maturity, cybersecurity maturity. So you got to demonstrate that not only do you have the tools, the policies, the procedures, etc., but that you're adhering to them and can demonstrate to the auditors that that you are mature, and that's what gets you certification. Just a little bit about ourselves. We have gained a significant amount of experience in this. In fact, a Prevail customer, which was an SMB, small to medium business, went up before DIBCAC, which is the Defense Industrial Base, Department of Defense's Cybersecurity Assessment Center, and came back with a near perfect score. And so gave us a lot of understanding. We're going to be presenting more findings on that in a webinar on May 13th. So those that are interested, please tune in and you'll listen to the consultant that actually guided the organization and get straight how they got to perfection in NIST 800-171. So just putting the 4 points that I shared with you earlier, strong SSP, the platform, the expertise, and the early start, how do they come together? So when you look at CMMC from the perspective of compliance, there's 130 controls, but 17 domains. And so as an example, either on GCC or in this chart, I'm showing Prevail, when you deploy the platform, Prevail, you get compliance with the domains in green. So for example, access control, identification, authentication, substantively. The boxes in yellow are the use of the secure platform in conjunction with policies and procedures that you have developed and that are part of your SSP. And then others in blue are policies and procedures. So now you can see that if you have a strong, technology platform as your foundation, then you add on to it a system security plan that addresses policies and procedures, and you have expertise of a strong consultant with it. Now you are on your path to CMMC or NIST 800-171 compliance. When you look at criteria for platform, again, as you are looking, I mentioned Prevail and GCC High and others. These platform again have to be, themselves satisfying some pretty rigorous criteria. So, 4 that I mentioned that you'll find helpful as you look at these platforms. You want to make sure that they are at least FedRAMP baseline moderate equivalent themselves for cloud platforms. That encryption, which is going to be heavily relied upon to provide CUI protection, is using FIPS 140-2 validated protocols. If you're going for CMMC, the additional controls that you need to have the platform satisfy are DFARS 7012 C through G clauses. And if you're using cloud services to satisfy ITAR requirements, then that cloud service platform must be end-to-end encrypted with the cloud service provider not having access to any decryption keys, etc. And we'll speak more about end-to-end encryption and why it's asked for. This is just a quick look at a picture of the Prevail platform. So you'll see on the left Prevail Drive integrated with your PC. Again, as I mentioned, it's just a file folder with subfolders underneath, and you can create files in there, share those folders with right clicks, everything's versioned, etc. And on the right, you'll see just a standard Outlook platform, and you'll see that your standard Office 365 and Exchange emails come in, and you've got an encrypted, inbox. That's where all of your CUI emails come in, again with the same email and file sharing, with the same email address. And then finally, just a few other things that I'd like to mention in terms of additional resources that are available to you, and some of the criteria that you want to look at when it comes to email and file sharing systems or platforms. So when it comes to Prevail, as I mentioned, everything is based on what's a zero trust system, by which we mean we assume that a breach is inevitable. It will occur. And that's exactly what the National Security Agency is now saying. So what we saw occur with the Microsoft Exchange servers being breached across the world and the SolarWinds breach was that the best protected networks from the best organizations can be breached. And so the NSA came out and basically strongly endorsed what academia has always known, that one should go for zero trust systems that assume that the attacker will get through and protect the information regardless. So you obviously, while these are gargantuan efforts and tasks to protect information, you want to seek simplicity in deployment and in use. So you don't want the NIST framework or the technology platforms that you're choosing to be either very difficult to deploy, taking months and months to deploy, or difficult for end users to use, because otherwise they will sort of get around the fundamental requirements to protect information. So when it comes to Prevail, it's an overlay. It doesn't change your existing email and file infrastructure because it doesn't touch it. And as I mentioned, fully integrated into Outlook and Gmail, same email address. Again, giving an analogy for those that use iPhones, when you send a message to another iPhone user, it goes through Apple's iMessage in blue. If you send it to a non-iMessage user, it goes through a green SMS network. Similarly, if you communicate using Prevail, your CUI will go encrypted to other CUI users, and non-CUI is automatically just going through Outlook, etc. As far as resources are concerned, there are on our website a very definitive CMMC white paper that goes into every single control for CMMC, and therefore it includes all NIST 800-171 controls and how to address them and how the platform addresses them. In conjunction with EDUCAUSE, we had also authored a CMMC white paper specifically designed for higher education, and that's available. So also for DFARS, for those folks that are going to satisfy DoD requirements for self-reporting. And then finally, for this webinar, we created a NIST 800-171 briefing for higher education. And for all the folks that have registered for the webinar, please watch out for your thank you email, and we'll be sharing a link to that. And so those are the tools that we can provide. And with that, I think I've given you a fundamental understanding of the basics, your technology choices, and I look forward to addressing questions, and conclude by saying in the breakout session, I'll be happy to go into the security attributes of Prevail. And for those that are interested, I will basically share with you a full demonstration of the system in both electronic mail and file sharing.
Sanjay, thank you so much. The Q&A is already going on. Terry's over there frantically responding to questions, so we'll get to those. And I value the slide where you have the 17 domains that are color coded. I think answers a lot of questions. And we typically always say people, process, and technology, right? we start with people and we put technology last, but I think this slide helps illustrate the importance of having sort of a solid technology foundation with regard to compliance and getting started on this journey, right? And some of the questions we're seeing is really trying to pull out answers that we don't know around where is the direction the federal student aid is going to take with compliance around 800-171. And I think, getting started is the important part. We can't wait until we have those answers from federal student aid. We know that they're looking at 800-171 as a standard. I've shared some resources. So I think we're not moving to a different room for breakouts. We're just gonna sort of move over to more of a interactive Q&A. We still encourage you to put questions in the Q&A chat, but I think you'll have the ability to raise your hand and unmute as an attendee to ask questions, if I recall correctly. And
So I would be happy to take the questions over here that are up there. So Seth Shestak asked, we are financially challenged this year, planning to go GCC high, looking to explore lower cost options. I just completed a project, etc. to Logarithm. I mean, Seth, again, just giving an additional color. The reason we are chosen often is for, two important reasons, three really. One is that it's a very inexpensive system with Prevail, typically about 70% lower. Second is the ease of deployment, because not only are organizations financially challenged, but they're resource challenged. And so the easy adoption of the deployment of the system is the second. And the third is the high security. So that's how I would answer. Next question is from Jay Gelman. Is Prevail ready for M1 Max? Jay, I am sorry, I don't know what M1 means, but if you are asking that, does Prevail work on Macs? Yes, we do work on Macs as well, in addition to PCs. Willie George, where can we get the CMMC white paper for higher ed that was mentioned? It's on the Prevail website, and I believe it should be on the EDUCAUSE website. So if you go to our website and you look at resources,
I'll drop the links in there for the chat for folks.
Yeah. And also, please, we encourage you to take a look at the CMMC white paper itself, because that goes into every control required by CMMC and NIST 800-171. Is there any indication that the DoD will start requiring CMMD via DFARS 7021 for contractors? I do not know the answer to that. How are we going to isolate FSA data when it's all over the place on campus? Harry, I defer to you on that. You understand the environments better.
I was just typing an answer up to that, but I'm happy to answer it live. One of the things that we're looking at is using 800-171 as a baseline across the entire university. And I think it's important for people to understand the distinction between different types of CUI, right? So for those who have contracts with the DoD, you'll need to be CMMC compliant. Other federal agencies are not requiring that right now, and maybe they will at some point in time. And somebody jump in here if I've got this wrong, but I'm pretty sure my understanding of this is correct. So, for example, for the FSA data, it's going to be categorized as CUI, and will then necessarily need to have 800-171 controls in place, and you'll have to have a system security plan. But consider the difference here. You can have a POAM against the FSA related systems, where in CMMC there's no choice of a POAM. You're either pass or fail, right? So you can't have a plan of actions and milestones in which to correct anything that falls out of compliance.
I see another question from Larry Wilson. The question is, my understanding is CMMC has been delayed and there's an interim ruling based on NIST 800-171. Do you have any update on when CMMC is expected or required? So Larry, the information that you are working on is not accurate. I'll give you the latest on that. So as of December, CMMC became the law of the land by being included in DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation. The NIST 800-171 ruling that you're alluding to is also part of the same, DFARS regulation. So I'll simplify and describe it as follows. The law of the land is that all defense contractors, per the DFARS, ruling in December 2020, are now required to evaluate themselves on a NIST 800-171, framework and report their scores to the government's score reporting, portal. See, the same DFARS regulation made CMMC the law of the land. And so now, as of this year, we expect about 15 contracts will be requiring, CMMC. Where there are a bit of delays is that, remember that in order to get certified, you have to have auditors. And the first C3PAO, certified third-party auditors, have yet not, passed their audits from DFCAP, but several are in the process right now. So the summary answer to your question is CMMC will be rolled out this year. NIST 800-171 scores were reported by most organizations at the end of last year. And when I alluded to, the Prevail customer, again, that went for the NIST 800-171, it was a defense contractor, prepared themselves, reported their scores, deployed Prevail, and then went in front of DIBCAC. This is, again, the Department of Defense's, auditors, who then assessed them as a third-party auditor on how compliant they were to 800-171, and happy to share that they received a near perfect score. Just so that you are aware, when this organization decided to self-assess, they came up with a reasonable score. It was nowhere near, 110. We can't give you the exact numbers, but it was, let's just say for the sake of clarity, a positive score. When the assessor that they hired to prepare them actually took a careful look, the score became negative. So the point of this exercise is that, unless you have great expertise, you will tend to sort of overestimate what your own scores are. And the gap between where one organization is to a perfect NIST 800-171 score requires the elements that we had shared and that Harry had shared. You need to have a strong platform, you need to have policies and procedures, and you need to start early. So it took, many, many months of preparation for this organization to achieve this thing. So I hope that you weren't taken aback by a slightly long answer, but I wanted to make sure that I answered it thoroughly.
Sanjeev, do you want to stop screen sharing and maybe move to the demo, or spend a few minutes on that before? I think we had 1:45 as a stop time, but want to be respectful of your time, everyone's time. I think we are, certainly going to capture the Q&A. If we don't answer the questions here live, we can make sure that we follow up with attendees. Okay. Well, I'll be happy to, first share a fundamental understanding of the security principles. So as I mentioned, in the wake of the attacks on SolarWinds, which led to the compromise of emails and files of the head of the Department of Homeland Security and top government agencies, which are without question protected with the best security available,
but a legacy security model, the NSA came up with new requirements or recommendations for zero trust. So this is directly from their Feb 25th release. The NSA specifically said that, look, the traditional mode of security that is being used for your current systems is a perimeter-based network defense with levels of disjointed technologies to protect. And what this means is that you're putting mechanisms in place to prevent the attacker from ever getting to the system. As an example, there's a firewall to prevent an attacker from getting to the server. As an example, there are passwords to prevent the attacker from getting into the account, and so on and so forth. These are perimeter-based defense systems. But as the attacks showed, the best perimeter-based defense systems can be breached. And so what is being taught in virtually every academic institution and what the NSA is now recommending is that the right way to think about security is assume that a breach is inevitable or has already occurred, and create systems that can protect the information even when that happens. And these systems are called zero trust systems. And I'll share with you an analogy before I go into describing a zero trust system for computers. So think of the perimeter defense systems in the context of COVID as the use of masks. You put on a mask, the goal of the mask is to prevent the virus from getting through. And if you're diligent about it and so forth, it'll do a pretty good job to prevent the virus from getting to you. You socially distance and so forth. But nonetheless, the moment there is the slightest chink in that, the virus gets to you. So a zero trust system is more akin to the vaccine, which says that, look, no matter how well you isolate or what kinds of masks you wear, it is probable that you will be exposed to the virus. And so your body will be protected if you have, in essence, a vaccine. So this is sort of what are the principles of a zero trust system. And I'm going to quickly describe that for email and file sharing. So here's how your current mail systems work. They encrypt in transit, they encrypt at rest, then they go to the receiving company server and are delivered. But the email is visible on the server and it's protected by perimeter defense systems. So if, for example, as in the Exchange server brief with Microsoft, they got to the server or they breached through the firewalls, once they get to the server, they can look at the electronic communication. What an end-to-end encrypted system, on the other hand, does is it encrypts the electronic communication at the sender's side. It stays encrypted on the servers and is delivered encrypted to the recipient. Only the sender and the recipient can decrypt it, no one else. And so in this case, when the attacker gets to the information, all they get is encrypted gibberish because there's no known technique to decrypt that information. In the case of Prevail, the keys are not in any key server. They are at the end devices. And so you can think of Prevail more like a signal that you may have heard of for messaging, but it's designed for enterprise use. And this is really why the NSA recommends end-to-end encryption. A second difference between a perimeter-based system and a zero trust system is that zero trust systems often eliminate passwords. So in your current system, if you've got a password, and if the password is compromised, the attacker can get through remotely. You try to protect it with two-factor, but there are techniques to bypass that. A system with zero trust says no passwords. Instead, your email address serves as your identity, and a set of public-private key pairs is created, and your private key is stored on your device. And that's what authenticates you in conjunction with a device key. So your private key is on your computer and your phone, a different device key for your phone, and a different device key for your computer. And you don't need to know anything about these. They're just automatically created. The benefit of this is that the keys cannot be guessed. There is no known technique. In fact, they're like the atoms in the universe. You can't guess the keys. And second, since they are attached to your devices, the attacker cannot remotely log in. The third principle is that the worst attacks occur through admin vulnerabilities. If you compromise the admin, you get at everything, which is what again happened with the attacks on Microsoft Exchange servers, as well as in the SolarWinds attack. So in a zero trust system, you enable the admin to do their function. They can still look at encrypted emails, etc., but they cannot do so by themselves. So it eliminates them as a central point of attack. So how do they get access? Using what's called an approval group. So you distribute trust amongst a group of admins or approvers. And I was describing this to Harry yesterday. The approvers could be some admins. You could say, look, an approval group is, say, 6 admins. I need permission from at least 3, or I need permission from 3 plus the CISO. And when that happens, when the approval is given, each of those admins has only a fragment of the user key. So they can't look at the user's information by themselves, but when the approval is given, as this little animation is showing, you get access to the information. And then finally, you can also restrict the flow of CUI to a trusted community, which is your domain, and perhaps some email addresses, so that attackers cannot even get into your a network that has CUI, and you can't exfiltrate information out. So that's just basic principles of how these zero trust systems work. And I'm now going to show you a Prevail in action. So here's electronic mail. Here's a user. This is their Outlook. The regular email, again, it can be breached through passwords, through admins, through server breaches, etc. When you join Prevail, it automatically adds a second inbox with the same email address. And this is where all your CUI will be here. So for example, here's some information. You'll see that the email doesn't require any special password because we don't have any. You just open up the email, it says encrypted, you reply to it, and you say whatever, thanks, and off it goes. So the user doesn't have to do anything, but all of your CUI is segregated. When you send an email, the encryption is automatic. So if you send it to someone who doesn't handle CUI, student financial aid data, or CMMC control data, it'll just go through O365. But let's say you send it to somebody, even on Google, who say Ed Murphy, who handles this information, the system instantly switches to encrypted mode. And here's a demo for, higher ed. And you can put, CUI, you can put student financial aid data, you can put ITAR data and attachments, etc. And it is just exactly as you are used to with all capabilities, and you send this thing. If you were to send information to somebody who's not on Prevail, for example, there's a new student who you want to exchange student financial aid data with, and let's say the student was, say Ed was somebody in the organization, and there was somebody who's student at new.edu, I'm just making it up, it will go unencrypted. But if you want the student to now exchange encrypted, you simply turn encryption on, and the student will get invited to join and can join for free. They can create a free account on their phone or on the computer. It takes about a minute, and then the communication just happens as a controlled and compliant organization. And then finally, let's just show you what happens if you are on G Suite. So here's a Google user, our friend Ed Murphy. Again, the fundamental emails, etc., are non-compliant. But when you join Prevail, it asks you, do you want to get your messages in the Google browser? You say yes, and it adds a secure messages tab. And this is where the demo that I had just created for you comes in. So users that are on Google or on Outlook, etc., can get access to the system. They can get access to it free. And then finally, I'm just going to go show you the file sharing aspects of it. So I'm going to go project my screen here. And this is my phone. And I mentioned to you, you could create a Prevail account on an app in a minute. This is the Prevail app. The others you might recognize as Signal and WhatsApp. There's biometric authentication here. Here are all your key, emails. If you didn't, want to use the app, you'll get a notification in your regular email. And all your files are in Prevail Drive. So I'm showing you Prevail Drive on the computer. When you join it, it's just a drive system. You'll notice that, it's got a set of folders that the users created where you can store your CUI. All the folders that you have are instantly synced to your phone. So you'll see the same information there. Let's say you're working on a new project for the Navy. You open it up, you'll see the same project over here, and you'll see the same files over here. And all you need to do if you want to go and, encrypt something is either you store it or you drag and drop it. It encrypts it, uploads it, and you will see instantly it got synced onto your phone. And if you want to share this information, you can do so very, very simply from the phone. You can basically go and say, hey, I want to share this thing. And you can share the CUI with the regular email address and set varying permissions. You can allow the person you shared with to collaborate with you through an edit and share, so that if they make changes to the files, you're seeing the changes. Or you could even restrict them with view-only permissions, in which case they don't have a copy of that information on their phones. And then finally, you can do the same thing by right-clicking on the file system, and the same thing on a browser. So again, sorry.
Sanjeev, sorry, I was just going to jump in. There was a question in chat around, do you have a demo that shows it in Gmail? And I think I've seen that previously. I don't know if you have time to just sort of walk through the Gmail.
I will do that. Happy to. So I was just going to say that, let's say that you had the project that you wanted to share. You'll just select the folder, you'll say share, and you'll see who you've shared it with. And when you add the new person and you set permissions, say, read only, it also gives you the ability to put an expiration date. So if you're sharing CUI across the organization, or you want it for a limited time, you just set an expiry date, say for week or year. And at the end of it, the decryption keys will be deleted and all of the information wiped off. So you're not leaking CUI across organization. And finally, from an administrative perspective, you can deploy Prevail by pushing it through Active Directory or through the Prevail console. For compliance, everything is logged. So every transaction, whether email or file, who it's shared with, etc. And you have visibility down to the device level. Because remember, you've got keys. So you can see Baker can only be accessing his or her CUI from this computer and these phones, and you can lock those phones, etc., if that's what you don't want to happen. And then finally, for Freedom of Information Act, etc., if you want to decrypt emails, files, etc., you specify them. It will say get approval from the approval group. Once you get that, then you can decrypt and you can store and share as you're used to. So it was a rapid introduction, and then I'll now go to the Gmail version of it. So any questions so far before I go to the Gmail version? Because I went quite rapidly here.
There's a few questions in chat. Harry and I are doing our best to sort of answer through those while you're doing it.
Let me go and show you the Gmail, add in over, here. So here's your secure messages. You go get a message, you can reply all. You interact with it just as you are used to. When you go compose a message, it says here's a message. And let's say again, if I wanted to go and send it to say Ed Murphy, it will put an orange bar on it. It says Ed's got the ability to receive the message. If I was basically sending it to say, again, new student at, ne.edu, look what it does. It says the recipient doesn't have a Prevail identity. And if you send it, they will be sent an auto invite and they can go and access it, etc. So it's got really nice capabilities to work as you are used to. So Google users work the way they're used to. and Outlook users as they're used to. And so that's a little bit about the system. So happy to take any questions.
And Sanjeev, I think to run a show, I skipped ahead. I thought we were sort of in the breakout already. And I think we're that's next. So maybe we just move to that where folks that are still in attendance can unmute and ask questions, as I mentioned in the open. And I apologize for the confusing sort of the timeline on that.
No worries.
All right, wait, sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Orly. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Prevail. So I'll just be handling the breakout, and it's pretty simple. All you have to do is raise your hand with the little yellow raise your hand button that's at the bottom of your screen. And I will call on you, kind of like in kindergarten. Raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then you'll unmute yourself and you can ask your question to any one of our participants. So we have a lot of people here in the audience. I'm sure many of you have questions. Maybe we can just start finishing up the Q&A if there are any left on the Q&A here.
There's a specific one from Ron Loneker Jr. Google offers Google Vault that historically stores all email from Gmail users for legal discovery purposes. Is encrypted email from Prevail stored in Gmail or on a Prevail server?
So all Prevail email and files are stored on the quote unquote Prevail server, but the Prevail servers are cloud servers that are for CUI, for CMMC on AWS GovCloud. So Amazon Web Services GovCloud, and which is a FedRAMP high facility. And again, everything's replicated, etc. And so you can access it for legal holds and discovery, etc. Just as I showed you in the very brief demonstration, where you just go to the control and say, I want these emails, and it'll decrypt them and you can forward them for legal purposes. For others, if you want certain emails to be automatically archived, we have an archive capability where the emails are in real time, once they've been sent, etc. Will be decrypted and stored in the archive vault. And certain organizations, particularly financial services, are required by law to do that, and so Prevail supports that as well.
All right, thank you, Sanjeev. The first question is from Eric Berube. Apologies if I'm butchering your last name, but I will allow you to talk, Eric, and you just need to accept. I'm asking you to unmute, and please go ahead with your question, Eric. Why don't you first of all tell us where you're from, and then ask your question.
Yeah, Harry did respond to me, and I think I might take him up on it. Aside from this, I don't want to burn through our time remaining.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eric. All right.
I see two other specific Prevail questions. One is slightly off topic for Sanjeev. Does Prevail meet CJIS compliance requirements? CJIS is usually
Well, Justice. Yeah, I think Prevail stands at the pinnacle of meeting requirements, because again, every piece of information is end-to-end encrypted, and so it is seeing a significant interest from security organizations, criminal justice organizations. So I'd be happy to take it offline with our compliance team. But in essence, meeting CMMC level 3 and above, and NIST 800-171 puts it in excellent situation to meet the requirements that you allude to.
There was, I was gonna say, there was another question from Cal Fry that's Prevail specific as well. Prevail, the sender encrypted messages, how much does it look like spam?
Sorry?
So
Does
does
the-
it come from Prevail, or
Yeah.
does it come from the actual?
Yeah. So actually, you will never see it trapped in spam, and the reason is the following. I will, again, with your kind permission, show you a slide that describes, why that's not the case. So maybe we go to the next question, and I will answer this with the slide because it'll clarify why your Prevail message will never be seen as spam, because the short answer is it's going on an out-of-band channel where the spam filters, etc., don't see this. And I'll describe it to you just momentarily. Just bear with me, and that will explain to you.
And while you're looking, Sanjeev, Harry, and I think, looking at Carlos's question and with Chris Gregg's comments, I think that's the unanswered question from the FSA perspective. That's what we talked about in our community group on Tuesday. That's what Jarrett tries to address in his policy piece, is we don't know where, what the next step for FSA is.
Okay, so this is why your encrypted messages never get trapped, and why the deployment never touches your existing servers. So when you send an email from Outlook, or you're sharing a file, generally an email is going to an Exchange server or a POP IMAP SMTP server. This is what your system looks like. So the Prevail email, once it's detected to be encrypted, goes to a local host on your computer or in the app on the phone, which has an SMTP IMAP proxy and the crypto engine that basically goes and encrypts your email with a new key. And that email is then forwarded onto the Prevail server on AWS GovCloud. And if you wish, that can be an on-premise server. And that's when it gets delivered at the other end. So that's why your Prevail inbox is absolutely spam-free, and your Prevail email will not be stuck in spam either. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
All right, do we have anyone else who wishes to raise their hand and ask a question? Going once, going twice.
Okay.
All right, well, maybe, we thank everyone for coming.
I appreciate, again, the audience, and Harry, thank you so much. And Brian, thank you so much for being here with Prevail. Harry, you've led a masterful program for compliance and security, and I'm sure, I found your comments very helpful. And Brian, you've been a champion at the forefront of cybersecurity and compliance. We truly appreciate your presence over here, and I hope that some of the things that we had to share were helpful to the educational community. And please look forward to our NIST 800-171 brochure that we've co-authored with Brian and EDUCAUSE. Thank you for your participation.